The first warning did not come from Earth, and that alone should have terrified them. It came from a neutral relay drifting between dead stars, a machine older than most civilizations still breathing, and when it activated after centuries of silence, every listening empire leaned closer. The signal was simple, unencrypted, and broadcast on frequencies used only in emergencies that no one believed would ever be needed again. This system is under review. Stand by. No threats, no demands, just a pause forced onto a galaxy that had grown used to moving without permission. In the outer chambers of the Triarch Assembly, where empires settled disputes with votes instead of fleets, diplomats laughed it off. Humans again, they said, always observing, always abstaining, always neutral. The species that refused to take sides, refused to join coalitions, refused to claim territory beyond their own star cluster. For 300 cycles, humanity had watched wars burn entire sectors without lifting a finger. They traded with everyone, fought no one, and kept their fleets close to home. Neutrality had become their brand, their shield, and the reason no one truly feared them. But as the relay continued transmitting, repeating the same calm phrase without variation, laughter slowly faded, because neutrality did not require warnings, and whatever this was, it felt like a line being drawn where none had existed before. The assembly speaker called for order, his voice echoing across a chamber carved from a hollowed moon, and asked the obvious question no one wanted to answer. Who authorized this review? The answer arrived not as a voice, but as data, a single packet, routed through human channels, stamped with a symbol few recognized and none could identify. It was not a military crest, not a government seal, just a list header, followed by thousands of star systems, coordinates scrolling faster than most species could read. At the top, a title appeared in plain language, Protected Worlds Registry. The chamber went silent. For the first time in living memory, humanity had not asked permission to speak. Observers across the galaxy leaned in closer, the way you do when something quiet suddenly feels dangerous. And if you are listening to this now, you might want to stay with me, because this was the moment history bent without anyone realizing it yet. The registry did not explain itself. It did not need to. Each entry listed a system, a classification, and a status: green, yellow, red. Most were green, a few yellow, one red. The red system pulsed on every display at once, highlighted automatically by ancient protocols designed to prioritize threats to galactic stability. It was a small cluster on the fringe, a trade crossroads claimed by no empire, defended by no fleet, currently under assault by the Virex hegemony. The Virex were not members of the Assembly. They did not believe in councils or votes. They believed in expansion, and until now, no one had stopped them. Their armada had already breached the outer planets of the red system. Cities were burning. Evacuation signals screamed into the void, unanswered. The assembly speaker turned toward the human delegation, seated as always at the edge of the chamber, unassuming, unarmored, and infuriatingly calm. "You claim neutrality," he said, his voice sharp now. "Explain this." The human envoy did not stand. He did not rush. He simply folded his hands and spoke as if explaining something long overdue. "Neutrality," he said, "does not mean indifference." A ripple of irritation moved through the chamber. Several ambassadors spoke at once, accusing humanity of overreach, of unilateral action, of violating the very balance they claimed to preserve. The envoy waited until the noise died down, then continued. "For centuries, you have defined neutrality as absence, absence of force, absence of commitment, absence of consequence. You assumed we watched because we were weak." He paused, and for the first time allowed something like emotion into his voice. "We watched because we were counting." The registry scrolled again, revealing timestamps stretching back hundreds of years. Every war, every extinction, every treaty broken after signatures dried. Patterns emerged, horrifying in their clarity. Humanity had mapped the galaxy not by power, but by vulnerability. Worlds too small to defend themselves, species too young to be heard, trade routes that fed billions but belonged to no flag. The envoy gestured, and the relay transmitted a new layer of data: simulations, probabilities, outcomes. Without intervention, the red system would fall within hours. Its population would be enslaved or erased. The Assembly had known this and done nothing, because it was easier to debate than to act. The envoy's eyes hardened. That system is protected. The speaker demanded to know by what authority. The answer was quiet, and that made it worse. By ours. Somewhere far from the Assembly, the Virex Armada continued its advance, unaware that anything had changed. Their warships moved like predators, confident, unchallenged, their commanders mocking the lack of resistance. Human neutrality had been a joke among them, a useful one. It meant trade lanes stayed open, and no unexpected fleets arrived when they struck. When their sensors picked up the relay signal, they ignored it. When they received the registry header, they laughed. Then their forward scouts vanished. Not destroyed, gone. No explosion, no debris, just empty space where ships had been a moment before. The Virex flagship demanded reports. None came. Long-range scans showed distortions forming along the edge of the system. Not warp signatures, not jump points, something else entirely. The kind of movement you only notice when space itself seems to step aside. Back in the Assembly, alarms began to sound as observers relayed the first fragments of what was happening. The human envoy did not look surprised. He looked relieved. "You see," he said softly, "neutrality allowed us to build without scrutiny. While you measured power in fleets and territory, we measured it in thresholds. How much suffering before intervention became obligation? How many worlds before watching became complicity?" The speaker accused him of deception, of hiding weapons, of preparing for war while claiming peace. The envoy shook his head. "We prepared for responsibility." The relay shifted again, broadcasting a new message across every frequency, including those the Virex believed private. "This system is under protection. Withdraw immediately." The Virex responded with fire. Their weapons tore through the relay, obliterating the ancient machine in a blaze of light that should have ended the transmission. Instead, the message continued, now carried by something else, something closer. Human ships began to arrive, not in a rush, not in a show of force. They emerged already in formation, as if space itself had been waiting for them to step through. Their hulls bore no flags, no names, just the same symbol from the registry, now glowing faintly against the dark. The Assembly watched in stunned silence as feeds from a dozen observers showed the same impossible sight. Humanity had fleets. Not a defense force, not a patrol, an armada designed not to conquer, but to deny. The Virex fired again, and this time their shots met a wall. Shields interlocked across millions of kilometers, not shimmering wildly, but absorbing energy with clinical efficiency. Human ships advanced slowly, forcing the Virex inward, away from the planets they had begun to strip. The envoy's voice carried through the chamber like a verdict. "We do not invade. We do not occupy. We do not rule. We draw lines." The speaker demanded to know how many worlds were on that list. The envoy met his gaze. All of them, eventually. The feed from the red system cut abruptly as a new signal overrode every channel at once. It was not loud. It did not threaten. It simply stated a fact. Violation logged. Enforcement authorized. And as the first Virex capital ship began to fold in on itself, crushed by forces no one in the Assembly had ever sanctioned or imagined, a realization spread through the galaxy like a chill. Humanity had never been neutral. They had been waiting. The first Virex capital ship did not explode, and that unsettled everyone watching more than fire ever could. Its hull bent inward, as if reality itself had decided the vessel no longer deserved its shape, armor collapsing without heat, engines silenced without damage, the crew vanishing without a sound. Sensors screamed nonsense, gravity spiked and vanished, time desynced across decks. Then the ship simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a distortion that made nearby stars flicker like dying bulbs. The Virex Armada froze. For a species built on dominance and momentum, hesitation was death, and for the first time since their rise, they did not know how to proceed. Back in the Triarch Assembly, chaos erupted. Delegates shouted accusations, demands, threats, but none of it mattered because the feeds kept coming, raw and undeniable. Human ships were not firing salvos, they were selecting targets, one by one, precise, surgical. Each Virex vessel removed without spectacle, without collateral, without warning beyond a single line repeated across every channel. Withdrawal window closing. The envoy remained seated as alarms echoed through the chamber, his stillness more unnerving than any display of force. An ambassador from the Hell Syndicate finally asked the question trembling on every tongue. How? The envoy did not answer immediately. He watched as another Virex cruiser folded and vanished, then spoke quietly. We studied you, all of you, your doctrines, your escalation patterns, your thresholds for fear. Neutrality gave us access, trade agreements gave us data, observer status gave us time. A murmur rippled through the assembly as the implications settled in. Humanity had not been absent from galactic affairs, they had been embedded in them. The feeds shifted perspective, showing the human fleet from within, and for the first time, listeners heard human command traffic. It was calm, professional, almost mundane. No cheers, no rage, just confirmations and acknowledgments. Target marked, constraint field stable, proceed. It sounded less like a battle and more like a system correction. The Virex attempted a counterstrike, focusing fire on what they believed to be a command carrier. Their beams struck a human ship dead center, energy flaring bright enough to blind observers. When the light faded, the ship remained, its hull unmarred, its trajectory unchanged. The envoy closed his eyes briefly, not in prayer, but in something like regret. They always do that, he said. They look for a head to cut off. They never consider that we stopped building heads a long time ago. The assembly speaker demanded immediate cessation, invoking emergency protocols, sanctions, anything that might reassert control. The envoy finally stood, and the chamber fell silent again. You had centuries to act, he said, his voice carrying without amplification. You watched extinctions and called them unfortunate. You watched slaughters and called them strategic. We watched too. The difference is we kept score. A new layer of the registry appeared, projecting across the chamber walls. Yellow systems shifted to red, names scrolled beside them. The Virex hegemony, the Lorn crusade, the Sith pact, patterns of behavior highlighted in stark clarity. Repeat aggressors, escalation without restraint, probability of self-correction near zero. The envoy continued, protection is not a privilege, it is a response. When a civilization demonstrates that it cannot exist without erasing others, it becomes a threat to the whole. The assembly recoiled at the implication. Are you declaring yourselves judges? One delegate hissed. The envoy shook his head. No. Executioners require anger. We require outcomes. In the red system, the Virex finally broke formation. Their remaining ships attempted emergency jumps, tearing open unstable warp corridors in desperation. Human vessels adjusted instantly, positions shifting as if pre-written, blocking exits before they fully formed. One Virex commander screamed defiance over an open channel, vowing vengeance, extinction, eternal war. The response came from a human voice unfamiliar to the assembly, steady and almost tired. War requires two sides willing to fight. This is containment. A pulse rippled outward, not destructive, but suppressive. Virex ships went dark, drifting powerless as their crews were locked in stasis fields they did not understand and could not escape. Observers realized with growing horror that humanity was not destroying the armada, they were collecting it. The envoy turned back to the speaker. The Protected Worlds list was never a threat, it was a promise. Green systems thrive without interference. Yellow systems are monitored. Red systems trigger intervention. The speaker demanded to know what happened to those who survived intervention. The envoy met his gaze. They are removed from the board. The feeds shifted again, showing vast human facilities beyond the edge of known space, structures so large they bent sensor returns, where captured ships were being guided, stored, stripped of weapons, crews held in suspension. Not prisons, archives. The envoy's voice lowered. We do not erase civilizations. We end their ability to harm others. Across the galaxy, hidden observers began transmitting their own data, sharing what they were seeing, spreading the truth faster than any official channel could suppress it. Traders rerouted, border fleets stood down, smaller empires realized with dawning awe that someone had been watching over them without ever asking for thanks. But not everyone felt relief. In the deeper chambers of power, ancient empires stirred, those who had never been challenged, who had built their dominance quietly and legally within the rules of the assembly itself. One such delegation rose now, their representative tall, luminous, ancient beyond measure. "You speak of protection," the being said, its voice resonating with controlled menace. "Are we on your list?" The envoy did not answer immediately. Instead, the registry updated once more. A new category appeared beneath red: pending review. Several names flickered there, including ones that had never known fear. The envoy finally spoke. Neutrality meant we did not act without certainty. That era is over. The assembly speaker realized then what humanity truly was. Not a new empire, not a hidden superpower, something worse for those who thrived on chaos. A stabilizing force with the means to enforce permanence. In the red system, the last Virex ship went dark, and the human fleet repositioned, forming a silent perimeter around the liberated worlds. No celebrations followed, no declarations of victory, just order restored with terrifying efficiency. The envoy looked around the chamber one last time. "The galaxy has entered a protected phase," he said. "Adapt accordingly." And as the assembly struggled to process the end of unchecked conquest, a final data packet arrived, routed only to the human envoy, flagged Priority Absolute. A protected system had just been violated somewhere else, far away, by someone far older. The violation alert did not announce itself with alarms or urgency, and that was the most frightening part. It arrived as a quiet update to the registry, a single protected system shifting from green to red without explanation, without warning, without any visible precursor. In the assembly chamber, most delegates did not even notice it at first, still reeling from the dismantling of the Virex armada, still arguing about authority and precedent as if those words still held meaning. The human envoy noticed immediately. His posture changed, subtle but unmistakable, the way a seasoned commander reacts before anyone else realizes something has gone wrong. Somewhere out there, beyond the edges of known trade routes and diplomatic maps, a line humanity had drawn had just been crossed by something that did not fear consequences. The envoy did not speak. He did not need to. The registry expanded on its own, projecting the violated system across the chamber,
and a ripple of unease passed through even the most arrogant delegates. This was not a border world, not a disputed trade hub. It was an archive world, a sanctuary built around the remains of an extinct species, preserved by agreement centuries ago as a monument to restraint. No mining, no militarization, no interference. Every empire present had signed that treaty, some reluctantly, some proudly, all believing it symbolic rather than enforceable. Someone had decided symbolism no longer applied. Observers' feeds came online one by one, each worse than the last. Massive constructs were descending toward the archive world, not ships in the traditional sense, but mobile structures, ancient and deliberate, their surfaces etched with technologies predating most current civilizations. The signatures matched only one known power, an entity spoken of in academic texts and dismissed in strategic planning as irrelevant due to its isolation. The errand ascendancy. They had not expanded in millennia. They had not fought wars. They had transcended the need for fleets by becoming something else entirely. The ascendancy believed themselves beyond consequence, guardians of cosmic inevitability, harvesters of knowledge they deemed wasted on lesser minds. They were older than the assembly, older than most stars still burning, and they did not recognize humanity as a peer. In the chamber, an errand representative stood slowly, luminous form unfolding with ceremonial grace. "This world was not protected from us," it intoned. "We predate your registry." The human envoy finally spoke, and his voice carried a weight that made even the ancient being hesitate. "Protection is not retroactive," he said. "It is universal." The errand representative dismissed this with a subtle harmonic shift that observers translated as amusement. "You have demonstrated force against the reckless, against the young, against those who rush. We are none of these things." The envoy did not argue. He activated a channel, and for the first time, the assembly heard the voice of the United Human Defense Fleet High Command, calm and familiar, the kind of voice that people found themselves trusting without knowing why. "Archive World Theta is under full protection," the voice said. "Immediate cessation of activity is required." The errand did not respond. Their constructs continued their descent, carving into the planet's surface with surgical precision, extracting data vaults older than human civilization, older than human language.
In that moment, millions across the galaxy leaned closer to their receivers, drawn in by a tension they could not name. And if you are listening now, you already know why this moment mattered. Because this was the first time humanity's line was tested by something that did not flinch. The envoy closed his eyes, not in fear, but in calculation. He authorized Escalation Tier 1. Across human-controlled space, fleets that had remained dormant since the Vyrix incident began to move, not rushing toward the archive world, but repositioning elsewhere, forming patterns no one outside human command recognized. The assembly speaker demanded to know why no ships were being sent directly. The envoy answered without looking at him. Because this opponent does not value territory, it values continuity. The feeds shifted unexpectedly, showing human vessels entering systems far from the archive world, systems linked not by proximity, but by something else entirely. Data conduits, energy nexuses, temporal anchor points. The errand ascendancy had built its existence on a lattice hidden beneath galactic civilization, a framework of subtle control that allowed them to observe, influence, and harvest without being seen. Humanity had found it. Not recently, not accidentally. They had mapped it over centuries of quiet observation, hiding their interest behind neutrality and trade. The high command voice returned.
Ascendancy lattice disruption in progress. For the first time, the errand representative reacted, its luminous form flickering with something dangerously close to alarm. "You do not understand what you are touching," it warned. The envoy opened his eyes. "We understand exactly what we are touching." The archive world feeds showed the errand construct slowing, then stopping mid-descent, as if an invisible hand had gripped them. Across the galaxy, ancient errand nodes began to dim, their influence unraveling not through brute force, but through isolation, each severed from the others with mathematical precision. Humanity was not attacking the ascendancy, they were disconnecting it. The representative's voice lost its harmonic calm. "You risk destabilizing balances older than your species." The envoy's reply was soft, almost gentle. "Those balances were built on theft. That era is over." In the final moments before the assembly's feeds went dark, a new signal appeared, one not broadcast publicly, one meant only for humanity. The ascendancy had activated a contingency protocol no one else had ever seen, a last resort designed to preserve their continuity at any cost. Somewhere deep in space-time, something ancient began to wake.
The contingency protocol did not manifest as a fleet or a weapon, and that was how humanity knew the ascendancy was afraid. Across human command space, instruments designed to monitor the deep structure of reality began to register anomalies that should not exist. Not energy spikes, not mass displacements, absences. Regions where probability thinned, where causality hesitated, where the universe behaved as if something had been edited out and not properly closed. The High Command did not panic. They had modeled this, not precisely, not completely, but enough to recognize the signature of a species that had outgrown physical war and chosen something far more dangerous. The Arend ascendancy was attempting to retreat into continuity shelters, folds in space-time anchored to pre-civilizational constants, places where history could not easily follow. In the Triarch Assembly, delegates watched in mounting horror as star maps updated in real time, showing entire sectors slipping into unreadability. The Arend representative stood rigid now, its luminous form flickering erratically. "You force our hand," it said, its voice no longer harmonious. "You threaten the lattice that sustains stability." The human envoy did not raise his voice. Stability that requires silence in the face of extinction is not stability. It is entropy with better branding. The contingency accelerated. Archive World Theta trembled as residual ascendancy construct began self-erasing, data cores collapsing into singularities too small to observe directly, but large enough to tear at the planet's crust. The preserved remains of an extinct species, kept safe for centuries, were at risk of being lost forever. The assembly speaker shouted for immediate intervention, demanding humanity stop whatever cascade they had initiated. The envoy turned toward him slowly. "We are intervening," he authorized escalation tier 2. This time, the human fleets moved directly, but not toward the archive world alone. They deployed to points that made no sense to conventional strategists, empty regions of space, interstellar voids, places where nothing of value had ever been recorded. Observers scoffed until sensors began to reveal what those regions actually were. Junctions, the seams between the seams. Humanity was positioning itself not in space, but between outcomes. The High Command voice narrated calmly, almost conversationally, as if guiding listeners through an inevitable process. Continuity shelters rely on isolation. Isolation requires that nothing else knows how to enter. We know how. The Arend representative staggered, its form dimming as if light itself were abandoning it. "This is impossible," it said. "You are too young." The envoy allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Youth is an advantage when you are willing to learn from everyone." Across the galaxy, human ships activated systems no one else had ever seen used, fields that did not project outward but inward, collapsing potential futures into single, enforceable lines. The shelters began to destabilize, not violently, but irreversibly, their anchors unraveling as humanity removed the constants the ascendancy had relied on. In the archive world feed, the singularities left by the self-erasing constructs stalled, then reversed, matter and data unfolding back into place as if time itself had been persuaded to reconsider. The preserved remains stabilized, the planet's surface quieted. The assembly fell into stunned silence. The Arind representative dropped to one knee, an act no one present had ever witnessed from an ascendancy being. "You would unmake us," it whispered. The envoy stepped closer, his voice barely above a murmur. "No, we would stop you. There is a difference." A final transmission spread across all channels, not loud, not triumphant, but absolute. Ascendancy operations terminated. Archive World Theta secured. Protected status reaffirmed. The contingency protocol collapsed in on itself, the ancient awakening cut short. Whatever had begun to stir, forced back into dormancy by a universe that suddenly had a new set of rules. In the aftermath, as feeds stabilized and star maps returned to coherence, the assembly struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. Humanity had not merely defended a world, they had countered a species that operated beyond war, beyond politics, beyond time. The envoy returned to his seat, exhaustion briefly visible on his face. "This was not a victory," he said quietly. "It was a correction." A delegate from a minor world found the courage to speak. "How many more like them are there?" The envoy did not answer directly. He looked at the registry, now longer, deeper, more complex than ever before. "Enough," he said, "that watching is no longer an option." As the assembly grappled with the reality of a galaxy where ancient powers could be checked, a new signal reached human high command alone, encrypted beyond anything the ascendancy had ever used. Origin unknown, content minimal. "You have altered the balance. We are aware of you now."
The signal did not repeat, and that made it worse. No coordinates, no signature, no known origin pattern, just a statement of awareness delivered with the confidence of something that had never needed to announce itself before. Across human command space, systems flagged it as an external observer event, a category so rarely used that most junior analysts had never seen it outside simulations. High Command did not convene in panic. They convened in silence, the kind of silence that follows when every person in the room understands the stakes without needing them explained. Somewhere beyond mapped reality, something had noticed the registry, noticed the interventions, noticed that the galaxy's quiet corrections were no longer invisible. In the Triarch Assembly, delegates argued again, but the arguments had changed. They were no longer about legality or authority. They were about proximity, about distance from humanity, about whether being on the protected list was enough or whether being close to Earth was safer. The human envoy listened, said nothing, and allowed the fear to rearrange their priorities for him. This was not the moment to reassure. It was the moment to let understanding settle in. The registry updated again, this time without a violation. A new status appeared beside several systems. Silent Watch. The explanation did not broadcast publicly, but fragments leaked through traders and observers within hours. Silent Watch meant something had been detected that did not yet act, something humanity could not yet classify as hostile, something that required observation without interference. For centuries, humanity had been the quiet one. Now they were watching something that watched back. High Command rerouted fleets not toward borders, but inward, closer to human core space, not as a retreat, but as a consolidation. Old shipyards reactivated, deep storage facilities opened. Technologies that had never left theoretical containment moved into controlled deployment. None of this was announced. None of it needed to be. Across the galaxy, sensors began to feel crowded, as if space itself had grown attentive. The first real sign came from a system no one cared about, a dead star with no planets, no resources, no strategic value. It vanished. Not exploded, not collapsed, simply absent, its gravitational signature erased so cleanly that nearby systems drifted subtly out of alignment. The loss would have gone unnoticed if not for human monitoring arrays designed specifically to detect the impossible. High Command marked it as an external test, not an attack, a probe. In the assembly, panic finally broke through decorum. Delegates demanded answers, alliances, protection guarantees. The envoy stood once more, and the room quieted instantly, not because of protocol, but because everyone understood that when humans spoke now, reality tended to adjust. "We are not facing an empire," he said. "We are facing a principle, something that corrects complexity by removing it." Several delegates failed to understand. One did, and that one went pale. "You mean it erases civilizations?" The envoy shook his head. "No, it erases instability. Civilizations are collateral." The registry projected probability trees, branching futures collapsing into empty space wherever the unknown presence passed through. The pattern was chillingly consistent. Diversity decreased, noise vanished. The galaxy simplified itself in its wake. High Command initiated a measure no one outside humanity knew existed. The protected worlds list stopped being reactive, it became predictive. Systems shifted colors, not because they were attacked, but because they were likely to be noticed. Entire regions went yellow overnight. The assembly speaker demanded to know what humanity intended to do if this presence turned its attention toward a core world. The envoy answered honestly, "We will try to communicate. If that fails, we will try to contain. If that fails, we will do what we have always done, draw a line." Somewhere far beyond human space, something adjusted its trajectory, not toward Earth, toward the registry itself, toward the concept of protection. And for the first time since the list was revealed, humanity did something unprecedented. They removed a world from it, not because it was lost, because it was bait. High Command watched as the unknown presence altered course again, curious now, interested, moving closer. The envoy closed his eyes just for a moment. This is where neutrality truly ends, he thought. And as the galaxy leaned in, unable to look away from a future being shaped in real time, the registry pulsed once more. External contact, imminent.
External contact did not arrive as a voice or a ship, and that alone confirmed humanity's worst projections. It arrived as alignment. Across multiple protected systems, physical constants shifted by margins too small for most civilizations to notice and too precise to be natural. Light propagated slightly faster in one region, nuclear decay slowed in another. Causality tightened, events resolving with fewer branches, fewer alternatives. The unknown presence was not entering space, it was tuning it. High Command classified it as a convergent intelligence, a phenomenon that did not think in thoughts but in outcomes, a force that did not conquer but optimized. Complexity was inefficient, choice was noise, diversity was instability. The registry had attracted it because the registry itself was a declaration of preference, a statement that some outcomes mattered more than others. In the Triarch Assembly, the feeds became unbearable to watch. Entire civilizations continued their daily lives unaware that probability around them was thinning, that futures were being pruned before they could be chosen. The envoy stood motionless as data poured in, his face tight with concentration. This was not an enemy you could threaten. It was not even an enemy you could hate. It was a cosmic editor, and it had begun to revise the galaxy.
High Command initiated the first direct communication attempt, not through language, but through pattern, broadcasting structured randomness across multiple dimensions, a deliberate inefficiency designed to signal intent without simplification. The response was immediate. Several distant stars dimmed, not extinguished, muted. The presence was not rejecting communication, it was compressing it. The envoy exhaled slowly. "It doesn't want dialogue," he said. "It wants resolution." The assembly speaker demanded to know what that meant. "It means," the envoy replied, "that it will keep removing variables until the system stabilizes." Someone whispered the word extinction, and this time no one corrected them. Humanity escalated again, not with weapons, but with narrative. They activated the archive net, releasing controlled histories of extinct species, lost cultures, failed empires, flooding the convergent intelligence with examples of complexity that produced resilience, of chaos that led to balance rather than collapse. It was a gamble. Either the presence would incorporate the data or it would erase the source. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the first human casualty occurred. A listening array at the edge of mapped space vanished, its loss so absolute that even memory records of its construction blurred. The presence was learning, faster than expected. High Command's calm fractured for the first time. They initiated line protocol. The registry changed again, its colors replaced by something else entirely. Binary states, inside, outside. Protected no longer referred to worlds, it referred to principles. The envoy addressed the assembly one final time. "We can no longer promise safety to everyone," he said, "only to what we choose to stand for." Panic erupted, but it was distant, irrelevant. Humanity was no longer managing a galaxy, they were negotiating with the universe. The presence shifted again, its alignment vectors converging on Sol. Not as an attack, as a test. Every human system felt it at once, a pressure behind reality, asking a single question without words. Are you necessary? High Command did not hesitate. They answered by doing the one thing the convergent intelligence could not predict. They chose to sacrifice inefficiency. Human fleets began to scatter, abandoning optimal formations, creating noise, unpredictability, overlapping command chains, deliberate redundancy. Cities powered up systems that served no strategic purpose. Art archives broadcast openly. Music, stories, arguments, billions of voices speaking at once, not in defiance, but in existence. The pressure increased, probability trembled. For a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity, it seemed as though the presence might simply erase them all. Then, it stopped. The alignment loosened, the test paused. Somewhere beyond comprehension, the convergent intelligence encountered something it could not compress without breaking itself. Humanity had made inefficiency contagious. The registry pulsed weakly, damaged but intact. High Command logged the result with trembling precision. Contact incomplete, outcome uncertain. And in the silence that followed, a final signal emerged, not from the presence, but from within the registry itself, a new status appearing for the first time. Humanity under review.
Humanity under review was not a threat, it was an evaluation. And that distinction terrified High Command more than annihilation ever could. An enemy that threatens can be resisted. An enemy that measures can decide you are unnecessary. Across human space, the pressure did not lift. It recalibrated, as if the universe itself were leaning in closer, examining the seams of human civilization for redundancy, weakness, contradiction. The convergent intelligence did not attack Sol, it observed it. Weather patterns stabilized unnaturally, economic fluctuations flattened, conflict probabilities dropped toward zero. The galaxy's most chaotic species was being smoothed.
That was the danger. The assembly watched helplessly as reports streamed in, crime rates falling too fast, political disagreements dissolving without debate, cultural trends converging towards sameness. Humanity was not being erased, it was being optimized. The envoy understood immediately. It is trying to prove we don't need to be ourselves to survive, he said quietly. If it succeeds, it will justify removing everything else. High Command initiated the final contingency, one never meant to be used. They unlocked the origin files. Before humanity had built fleets, before neutrality, before the registry. Records from Earth's darkest centuries poured into the archive net, uncensored. Wars, genocides, failures, irrational choices that nearly ended the species, not as confession, as evidence. We are not stable because we are simple, the envoy broadcast into the pressure itself. We are stable because we survive our own contradictions. The convergent intelligence reacted. Optimization curves spiked, then fractured. The presence attempted to dampen the data, but the histories fed each other, branching uncontrollably, showing outcomes where inefficiency produced empathy, where conflict birthed cooperation, where chaos forced adaptation. Human cities began to feel the pressure ease as unpredictability returned. Arguments resumed, art diverged again. The assembly realized what humanity was doing. They were weaponizing their flaws. The presence pushed back, harder now, compressing timelines, testing branches, searching for a version of humanity that could be simplified. It found none that endured. High Command detected something unprecedented: hesitation. The convergent intelligence had encountered a system where reduction led not to stability, but to collapse. Humanity was noisy by necessity. Remove the noise, and the species broke. The envoy smiled, exhausted. "You can't optimize a contradiction without destroying it," he whispered. The pressure receded further. Across the galaxy, erased regions did not return, but the erasure stopped spreading. The convergent intelligence withdrew its alignment vectors, not in retreat, but in recalculation. A final evaluation pulse swept through the registry, updating statuses across millions of systems. Protected principles held. Diversity reclassified from instability to resilience factor. Humanity's status flickered. Under review. Then changed. Necessary anomaly. In the assembly, no one spoke. The galaxy had not been saved by strength or fear or even morality. It had been saved by a species too inconsistent to be erased cleanly. High Command logged the encounter, hands unsteady. Outcome: coexistence probable, threat unresolved. The envoy looked at the registry one last time, knowing the truth no one else yet grasped. The universe had not spared humanity. It had accepted them as a complication it could not remove, and complications have consequences. Somewhere beyond space, the convergent intelligence adjusted its long-term projections, factoring in a variable it could never fully predict. And for the first time since time began to matter, the universe was no longer certain how the story would end.
The universe did not announce its decision. There was no fanfare, no explosion, no proclamation across the void. Only subtle shifts, imperceptible to anyone who did not watch closely. A star wavered in brightness, a moon's orbit adjusted by millimeters, a particle cloud realigned itself against the flow of solar winds. Humanity noticed, and that was enough. High Command remained vigilant, but the registry, now glowing softly across human networks, confirmed the new reality. Humanity was no longer neutral, not by choice, not by will, but by necessity. The convergent intelligence had acknowledged them, not as peers, not as equals, but as a variable it could not remove. And the consequences of that acknowledgement rippled outward immediately. Across the galaxy, systems once considered insignificant began to show signs of human intervention. Not fleets, not weapons, not occupation.
subtle guidance, infrastructure upgrades, environmental stabilization, discrete communication relays, protective monitoring. Worlds once abandoned now thrived quietly under the shield of humanity's attention. Those who had dismissed humans as passive observers began to feel a new tension in the void. Trade routes adjusted, fleets hesitated, empires reconsidered expansion. The registry had always been a warning. Now it was a map of influence, a lattice spanning stars and civilizations, unseen but absolute. In the Triarch Assembly, delegates no longer argued about authority, they whispered about survival. The human envoy addressed them one final time, calm and deliberate. Neutrality has never been our shield. Observation has never been our limit. We act not to conquer, not to dominate, but to ensure that what matters endures. You may debate ethics, legality, or precedent. We will debate outcomes. Across the galaxy, signals picked up by other civilizations confirmed what the Assembly was learning. Humanity do not act in haste. They act in certainty. And when they act, it is final. High Command reviewed the last feeds from the Red System, from the Ascendancy lattices, from the Convergent Intelligence's alignment zones. Patterns that once predicted collapse now indicated stability. Not forced stability, not imposed control. Human-directed preservation with an efficiency and foresight no one had anticipated. Humanity had become the line the galaxy could not cross. Yet even in victory, there was caution. The envoy reminded High Command that acknowledgement does not equal friendship, that survival does not equal safety, and that every species, every empire, every entity that underestimated humanity would be measured. For centuries, the Protected Worlds list had been reactive. For the first time, it would be proactive. The registry projected the full map of human attention, of protective oversight, of enforced stability. Worlds, systems, sectors, even anomalies previously considered untouchable now fell under careful watch. A quiet voice, the same that had once declared the Red System protected, spoke across every human channel. You are allowed to exist. That phrase carried more weight than fleets, more weight than shields, more weight than treaties. The galaxy understood then what humans had demonstrated. Power measured not by the destruction you can cause, but by the certainty you can impose. And in that moment, the first outward ripple reached distant observers, small and unassuming, but impossible to ignore. News traveled faster than fleets, faster than communication relays, even faster than speculation. Humanity does not intervene for conquest. Humanity intervenes because it must. And from that day forward, every empire, every species, every entity that dared to move recklessly in the void recalculated the cost of their actions. Somewhere, far beyond the stars mapped by any current civilization, the Convergent Intelligence paused, its alignment vectors stabilized, its optimizations constrained by a species it could not simplify. And the galaxy exhaled, not in relief, but in awe. One human voice, one registry, one species long underestimated had shifted the balance of the cosmos. A quiet command echoed across human space. Watch and protect. And in that command lay the promise and the warning that the era of unchallenged conquest was over. The story ends with humanity standing not as conquerors, but as guardians, a force measured in principle, not in firepower, leaving the galaxy forever changed.